All right. So next on the docket, we have some Creation Watch. Now, this was not again. I this just released last night, so I did not intend to cover this topic. I had something else uh, in the works for this. Actually, I just ended up going with this because it popped into my feed and it's old and funny, and I want to go through it with you. So this is the latest release from Kent Hovind official. It's not a Kent Hovind video though. He's not. I haven't seen him in it. I watched about 2/3 of it, and he's not in it actually. So we're not actually responding to Kent Hovind. There's some other folks in this video that we're going to be dealing with, but it's creation nonsense, and it's about animals. So I am pretty stoked to dive in. So let us engage. You can tell by the ratios of the screen that this is old. This is before tube TVs went out of fashion. So this is ratioed and I believe what is the resolution? Yeah, the resolution on this and the ratio is old timey. So we know this is pretty old stuff we're looking at. Let's go though.
Bird or fish, and ask yourself, could this really have been created through a process of evolution? Could time plus chance come together and give us all the beauty we see in the world?
Yes. All right. Thank you for joining me for Creation Watch this morning. That was Incredible Creatures. Oh, okay. We'll watch the rest of it.
Hi, I'm David Hames, and in the next few minutes, we're going to take a close look at some animals that are going to shatter that very idea. I want to introduce you to Dr. Job Martin. Dr. Martin has had a very interesting background. He's been a college professor and a dentist. He even served on the dental.
He's a dentist. A lot of the creationist doctors that they cite are dentists. It's kind of a trend. Now let's hear what he has to say. This I did look this up. So Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution was released in 2000. And there's a sequel to it. Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution 2 that was released in 2002.
Crew for President Johnson's Air Force One and the presidential fleet. But for the past 20 years, Dr. Martin has been lecturing students on incredible creatures that defy evolution. But it wasn't always this way. Dr. Martin, out of a scientific and medical background, once believed in the theory of evolution.
Evolution, as I was taught, it all started with a thing called the Big Bang. They say this Big Bang went kaboom and
I am going to press X to doubt on the notion that you were taught that evolution started with the Big Bang, sir. Not if you went to a actual biology class. I am going to speculate that in your biology class for your medical credentials that they never once, not a single time, mentioned the Big Bang model of cosmic origins. I bet that they didn't even mention a biogenesis, at least not too much, as we're still in a theoretical phase of understanding that process. But they didn't teach you about the Big Bang in an evolution class.
Shot out hydrogen gas mostly, and the gas somehow turned to dust, and the dust condensed down into planet Earth. The evolutionists say it started dry, and then over millions of years, volcanic activity produced the water, and then in some little pond of this water somewhere on planet Earth, these inorganic chemicals got together, and they were zapped by some kind of X-ray or something else, and all of a sudden you have this little speck of light.
So why are we saying inorganic chemicals? There were organic chemicals in prebiotic Earth. I think you're using the word organic wrong here.
and they say that was about 3.5 billion years ago. And then that little speck of life somehow, over about 3 billion years, became the first cell, which was somewhere around 600 million years ago. And then that progressively became beautiful you.
Dr. Martin's traditional
So
scientific
that punctuates how old this video is. We've traced life, I think, at 3.8 billion years. I think it was last time I checked. It might be 3.2. I'm not exactly sure, but it's billions of years. It's not 600 million years. When he says 600 million years ago, he's talking about the Cambrian explosion.
background would go through an evolution, rather a revolution, as he joined the staff as a professor at Baylor Dental College. This was the beginning of the evolution of a creationist.
And so in the fall of 1971, I went to Baylor in Dallas and gave my first lecture. It was on the evolution of the tooth. And I talked about how these fish scales gradually migrated into the mouth and became teeth. And a couple of my students came to me after class that day and said, Dr. Martin, have you ever investigated the claims of creation science?
I would like to understand how he refutes the obvious and clear scale origin of our teeth, because you more basally branched off groups of toothed organisms like sharks, their scales are still teeth. Their scales are just tiny versions of the teeth that are in their mouths. So it's not speculative. We can actually observe this.
Well, that was 1971. I'd never even heard of it. At that point,
Hey, Maynard. Good to see you this
been
morning.
a Christian for about 5 years. And so I'm thinking to myself, where are these guys coming from? I've never heard of this. And so I said, sure, I'll look into this with you. And I'm thinking, kind of as a cocky young professor, I'll blow these guys away. Well, they asked me to start studying the assumptions that the evolutionists make. And in all my years, 8 years of scientific education, I had never had a single professor tell me about an assumption. And
So how did you learn about the scientific method without understanding what a hypothesis is? Because when you say assumption, that's I don't have any doubt at all that what you mean. And correct me if I'm wrong. I know you can't because you're on a video from 23 years ago. But when you say assumption, you mean hypothesis. So the hypothesis is you make an observation and you say, I bet the reason why that happens is because of this. That's your assumption. That's your hypothesis. It's based on an observation, but it's still an assumption. And then you do experimentation, including building models, or making predictions to confirm that what you're seeing. We'll use your teeth as an example. Okay, so you see teeth. You see them in multiple organisms, invertebrates specifically, and we think, okay, so what are the origins of these features on our biology to help us eat? And you start looking into the organisms that split off earliest from the rest of us to see the organisms with teeth that split off from the rest of us. And you say, I predict that the most basal teeth that we find in the animal kingdom are among these organisms. And when we talk about that, obviously there are other organisms as well, like lampreys and things like that are more basal, but we're going to go with cartilaginous fish because that's a good branch, and they've been independent from the rest of the vertebrate lineage for hundreds of thousands of years. And we say, okay, so this basal group has teeth. We have teeth. So going back together, let's look at how these teeth developed. And then we note that, we do see that the scales of these more basally branched off lineage of organisms are the same, they look identical to microscopic versions of the teeth. They are produced by the same genes. So we're going to say that these are the origins of these of teeth, and then we look into the genetics of it and confirm that. So we make the prediction, and then we look into the genetics, and it confirms that. That's how science works. So assumptions are the first step.
we started looking at the assumptions, and I began to realize they're making some claims here that really the assumptions aren't valid when they tell us rocks are very old and all these kinds of things. And
right, they're assumptions that start off from the beginning, and then they do experiments where they make predictions and say, hey, if this rock is this old, we should find this. I'm not a geologist or anything like that, but you aren't a geologist either. And you don't have the tools to say, yes, we are able to confirm the age of these rocks based on these metrics.
And then they asked me to start studying some animals and see if I thought that animal could evolve. Well, the first thing that we really studied together was this little bug called a bombardier beetle. And this little insect, it's about a ½ inch long, and it mixes chemicals that explode. So I began to think, okay, now how would that evolve? Let's say if evolution is true and you're evolving along here and you don't have a defense mechanism, because that is the defense mechanism of the bug. So if evolution is true, it had to somehow evolve that. So let's say it's coming along here. Well, the first time
So when it comes to the bombardier beetle, the method by which it uses to spray its volatile chemicals out are not exclusive to this beetle. It's in fact the entire family that this beetle falls into do and are not the only ones that use chemical responses to predators. Most of the time they just do it as a threat display, but yeah, they do definitely spray. So the physiological characteristics of spraying chemical at attackers is not unique to the bombardier beetle. The chemicals that are sprayed, hydroquinone, present in most beetles, but it's used to so there's stinging more that may sting, just different or that may cause skin irritation, things like that. The bombardier beetle's unique in that it has the capacity to mix and heat the chemicals, so that when they spray out, they're pretty hot. But all the mechanics were there. But we're gonna get into that.
The explosion. What does it do to the bug? Boom! You just splattered your bug. Okay, so splattered bug pieces don't evolve.
Right. So the exploding chemicals were not there in the beginning when these features first evolved in this lineage. It was just a noxious spray.
So I thought, how could this have happened? Well, it doesn't blow itself up. It has another little factory inside itself that manufactures chemicals. A chemical acts as a catalyst so that when you squirt that chemical in with these other chemicals that are like in neutral, you get your explosion. Well, the first time it manufactured that little chemical, here it goes again, blew itself up again. But it doesn't.
This is back when Dwayne Gish's arguments about the bombardier beetle were still valid, that people were still using them. There are still people who use them now, but they're mostly like old boomer apologists like Ken Hovind. Don't actually this is well understood. If you don't understand this process, I'm not going to rehash it here, but Tony Reed did an amazing video on the bombardier beetle. I cannot plug that video enough. It is excellent. I originally thought I was going to do a video on the bombardier beetle, but then after watching Tony Reed's, there's really no point. He covers it. He puts a nail in that coffin. So if you're interested in that topic, I will kind of gloss over it here as we go through this with this incredible creatures that defy evolution video, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I will direct you for full details on the evolution of those chemical compositions and the way that they're released from the beetle and all the physiological steps that took place in the evolution of this organism to allow for it to produce this heated, noxious chemical are well accounted for in the beetle's lineage.
Why? Well, because it has like an asbestos-lined firing chamber. And even then it would blow itself up if it didn't have somewhere for the explosion to go. So it has like twin tail tubes. And it can aim these tail tubes all the way up, out the side, out the front. Let's say a spider is coming up toward its side and it doesn't have time to turn around.
I like squirt. I like squirt is like a grapefruit soda.
Shoot. It can just take its little gun turret, aim it out there and shoot. The explosion on this little bug, all you hear, if you're listening as a human, you hear this pop. But scientists have now put that explosion in slow motion. And it's like about 1,000 sequential little explosions, but they're so fast, all we hear is one pop. And so you think, well, now, why would that be? Well, that was a curious thing for the scientists that study this little bug. A lot of them are at Cornell University, some other places. And what they discovered was that if it was just one big pop, the little bug, if he's shooting like a spider, let's say over here, and he goes, bang, and shoots it, he's going to pop himself right out of there. It's like lighting a burner on a jet engine. He's out of there. But as long as it is a sequential explosion with his little legs, he can hang on. How would evolution explain a sequential explosion?
Because the beetles that did the sequential explosion were more successful than the ones who did the single explosion. This is such a weird argument about why. Because the ones that it worked with are the ones that passed on their genes, sir. They are not the ones that didn't don't get to send those forward.
This little bug messes with all the theories of evolution. There is no way a slow, gradual process is going to produce this bug. There's no way.
Why not?
Even the newest theories of evolution, like punctuated equilibrium, which means evolution happens very fast.
Oh, we're going to talk about Gould.
Well, there's no way that will explain this little bug. I began
All
to
right,
realize.
so hold on. He just mentioned punctuated equilibrium. Now I have to give what Darth Dawkins would call a community college lecture. But that was not a good Darth Dawkins impression. I don't think I could do a Darth Dawkins impression. I'm not pretentious, snobby, or narcissistic enough for that. But so punctuated equilibrium is about niche vacuuming. So there are two methods which organisms evolve. There's gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism is in a stable environment or semi-stable environment where an organism is stable and healthy and able to maintain populations, will experience slight modification in genetic groups over a geographic range. These are usually epigenetic expressions that take hold in a population due to environmental factors. Nothing big. You don't see a lot of changes in that. Now, punctuated equilibrium is when an extinction event, whether global or local, alters the environment that no longer supports the organisms that were initially evolved and adapted to live in that environment, and they are wiped out. New generalist organisms move into the environment and take advantage of the resource availability, and they essentially fill that role and evolve over generations somewhat rapidly to specialize in consuming the available resources that were vacated from that environment. That is punctuated equilibrium. And it's demonstrable, especially when you look at places like the Galapagos Islands. That's a good example of punctuated equilibrium, because different groups became highly specialized very recently and quickly adapted and evolved to a variety of resources to reduce competition with one another, but to cover all available niches and resource availability.
How could this particular little animal, for instance, evolve? It needed all of its parts. It needed everything there all at once, or you just don't have the animal.
It didn't need everything all there at once. There are a lot of beetles that do not produce the hot explosive chemicals. Some of them just produce the chemicals. Some of them produce chemicals with other qualities, like I said before, that may be noxious or pungent or even volatile to the touch. So
my stomach started to churn, if I really want to be honest. And my wife would tell you, my stomach churned for 5 years. It took a 5-year struggle for me to begin to flip the way I think, from thinking in an evolutionary way to thinking in more this animal or little creature, little bug, whatever, was created fully formed, just like it is.
Yep, just mysterious ways, Maya.
Did you know the world's strongest animal is actually the beetle? In fact, in one test, the rhinoceros beetle carried over 850 tons.
Did you just ask me if I knew that the strongest organisms on this earth were beetles, sir? I am Bumblebee, previously known as Brain Bug, and I know all the bug stuff.
Times its own weight on its back. That would be like me trying to carry 130,000 pounds. I don't think so. Now let's take a look at the world's tallest animal.
Well, you're talking about a square cubed law there with that. A beetle at your scale would not be able to lift that amount. It just the physiological forces. The square cube law is basically that for every time you double the physical size in order to maintain a balance in the mass, that the mass multiplies times 4. So uh, size goes up 2 times, the mass goes up 4 times. That's the square cube law. So a beetle would not, at our scale, would not be as strong as they are on the micro scale.
A bull
Morning,
giraffe is
Carol.
about 18 feet tall. In order to get blood up that long, skinny neck against gravity, the bull giraffe has to have a powerful pump, and that's his heart. And the heart of a bull giraffe can be as much as 2.5 feet long. Big, powerful pump. Now, as he's going along here, living his life, everything's just fine. But all of a sudden, this 18-foot tall creature decides, I need a drink of water. So he bends his head down to get a drink of water. Now we have a problem. Because now this powerful pump, instead of pumping against gravity, is pumping with gravity. And so the heart gives a mighty squeeze, and the blood shoots down his neck, hits his brain, and bursts his brain. And so now he just blew his brains out. Okay, so he's dying, and he must be thinking to himself, I need to evolve something here to take care of my problem. When I get a drink of water, I blow my brains out.
Does he think animals like say, oh, I'm going to consciously evolve this direction? Is that the claim?
Of course, we know dead creatures don't evolve, but he doesn't blow his brains out, because as he bends his head down, there are like little spigots in his artery that goes up the neck, little valves, and they close. But the last pump is beyond the last valve. And so it's enough to burst the little arterioles in his brain, but it doesn't go into his brain. The last pump kind of goes whoop underneath the brain into like a sponge. And this sponge just gently expands, and he hasn't blown his brains out, and he gets his drink of water. And now he sees a zebra kind of running up from this side, and he just ignores it. But he sees a lion coming up from this side. And, oh, the lion wants to eat me. I got to get out of here. Now, how does he know the difference, by the way? Evolutionists can't explain that to us. But the fact is, here comes this lion.
Did you just say evolutionists can't explain why the giraffe is afraid of a zebra and not a lion, or knows the difference between a zebra and a lion? Yeah, because the giraffes that didn't know the difference between a zebra and a lion didn't pass on their genes. So only the giraffes that could tell the difference between a zebra and a lion are the ones that were successful. It's kind of begging the question.
Going to eat the giraffe. And so the giraffe jumps up. He runs about 5 steps, passes out. Not enough oxygen to his
Morning,
brain.
Logan Fisher.
While he's there, passed out. The lion is eating him. He must be thinking, I need to evolve something here. I got this problem. I pass out when I get up too fast. But he doesn't, of course. Well, why? Well, because God made him so that when he begins to bring his head up, the little spigots, the little valves in the artery open. The sponge under the brain gently squeezes that last little pump of oxygenated blood up into his brain. There are little valves in the vein that goes down the neck. They close. And by the time he's up and running, everything is fine. His blood pressure is fine, and he does just fine. Well, how would that evolve? He needs all of those parts, all there, all at the same time, all at once.
So there are other giraffids that have these arteries in their necks that don't have giant 9-foot long necks. The reason the giraffe's neck is so long is actually more relative to its legs. The giraffe has the shortest neck in relative size to its legs than any ungulate, any other hooved animal, both live and fossilized. There are definitely some contenders. There were some long-necked camels that came really close to having the same condition, but the giraffe takes the cake. But there are even living other organisms that are related to giraffes. The okapi, for instance, which does have a relatively long neck by human standards, that has this same artery system in its neck to help regulate blood flow to its brain as it lifts up and down to drink. These features can also be found in equids in horses. And as I mentioned before, camelids, antelopes, a whole lot of artiodactyls and perseodactyls too. Like I said, horses did have these artery features to help them help their brain balance from drinking to standing upright. They do need to be able to react quickly. Giraffes not so much as some of these smaller organisms that need to be able to react quickly, but because the giraffes have few natural predators. Even I don't think the giraffe would necessarily be afraid of a single lion, or maybe a pride of lions might give pause, and perhaps a mother giraffe or a young giraffe might have some issues with that. Regardless, these features are not unique to the giraffe. They're not specific to the giraffe. The giraffe does have a lot of physiological characteristics to help with its extra long neck. The long neck, long thought to have been developed in order to aid in feeding on the highest grazing spots, is actually more recent research has shown that it's likely more derived from interspecific conflict between rival males. So they would giraffes and giraffids in general compete for females by neck wrestling and bashed each other with their heads like a flail. Other giraffes and giraffids do this too. There was an extinct clade of giraffes that actually did the headbutting thing, more like a Pachycephalosaurus or a Rocky Mountain sheep, where they crashed heads together repeatedly to compete for mating rights. But in general, the giraffe's long neck is a result of mating or sexual selection.
Or he's dead. And so I think the giraffe is another example of a designer. He needed a designer to design him just like he is.
The tallest giraffe known was named George. He resided at the Chester Zoo in England. George was 20 feet tall to the tips of his horns, which are actually called ossicones. Here's another interesting giraffe fact. Giraffes have no vocal cords. Now here's a bird you'll see around your house, but after taking a closer look at it, you might find it unbelievable.
The woodpecker is a very special little bird. The beak of a woodpecker is like industrial strength. It is stronger than other birds' beaks. He has special feet. Most birds have 3 toes.
Yet it's still made of chitin. Interesting that.
Toes out the front, 1 toe out the back. Woodpecker has 2 toes out the front, 2 toes out the back. And that's so he can climb around on a tree trunk, a vertical tree trunk, right side up, upside down, sideways.
And that's not unique to woodpeckers either. A lot of birds have zygodactyl legs. That's where, okay, so they have the 3 or 4 normal. This is the standard. This is the passer rate. So ignore my pinky because that's not there. We're going to talk about just this. Okay, actually, let me pop this down. Okay, so zygodactyl is, so this is, I had this pulled up here just a second. There was, okay, so this is, you can ignore my pinky. This is anisodactyly, where you got the 3 toes forward, 1 toe backwards. That's the standard. So he's wrong about that. Most birds do not have 3 toes. They have 4, 3 forward, 1 backwards. That's standard. Passer songbirds, birds of prey, eagles and falcons and stuff. They have this formulation of their toes. However, zygodactyly is when this one, the ring finger and the thumb, are facing backwards, and these fingers are 2 and 3 are facing forward. So that is zygodactyly, and that's what you see in woodpeckers, but also parrots, some owls, and cuckoos, including the roadrunner, which is peculiar because it doesn't hop around on the side of trees at all. It runs. So yeah, there are other formulations of toes, and there are 3-toed birds as well. They're just not very common. There's a 2-toed bird actually. The ostrich has reduced its feet down to just the 2 toes, so it doesn't have either. I think it has just 2 and 3. So the ostrich just has 2 and 3. Yeah. Anyway, moving on moving on. Sorry, I keep info dumping.
Feathers. They're more resilient. They're spongy and they're very strong and tough because he tripods himself with his 2 feet and his tail feathers, so that he grabs a hold of that tree, fans out his tail feathers, and then bangs his head into the tree. Now you would think that a woodpecker would go home every night and say to Mrs. Woodpecker, "Oh, I got this headache. I was banging my head on a tree all day." But he doesn't. Why? Because God made him with special equipment. For instance, between his beak and his skull, there's a piece of cartilage. It acts as a shock absorber. His skull is the thickest bone per body weight of any creature. As a matter of fact, brain surgeons study the brains of woodpeckers, how they're hooked in there and everything, to help them with like trauma people in accidents, that they need to put their brains back in there. And so they study woodpeckers. The woodpecker, with his strong skull and his shock absorber and his strong beak and his tail feathers and his feet, he's all ready to go, except for one thing. Once he drills his hole, he's got to get that bug out of the tree, because that's lunch. All right, well, how's he going to do that? Well, most birds, their tongue goes right to the tip of the beak.
It seems like the argument is either this one feature could not evolve. Well, this one feature could not evolve naturally, or this suite of features could not evolve naturally because it needed all the pieces to be in place. This is essentially Behe's irreducible complexity argument. But there are other. Again, this is he's depending on ignorance of the audience to not know about bird classification. There are other groups in the woodpecker family that actually are intermediate with some of these features. Flickers, for instance, are a specific group of woodpeckers that are sort of intermediate between. Let me see. This is Piscini tribe, which is the true woodpeckers. And then, so initially the tapping of a woodpecker is not necessarily to make the hole. That's a lot of misconception. What they are doing is actually using observation. They are doing sonic location when they do those faster. They're looking for hollow spaces underneath the wood to pull the insect larva out. They do leave little divots in there, but generally they're not driving their beak like a nail into the wood. The main goal is to detect the location of food, and they do kind of peck and poke to get the food out, definitely. But it's the chisel idea of how they access their food. There may be some misunderstandings there, because the that you hear when a woodpecker, that is not when they're going after it. That's when they're trying to locate it. Usually, what you hear when they're actually getting the food is more like tapping and cracking of the bark. Anyway, fun little bird classification. But within that clade, there are other bird groups. We have wrynecks, and we have piculates and sapsuckers that are all in this group that have some of the features or intermediate levels of the features, or those same features but less specialized than the specific group of woodpecker. Even honey guides are in this group. Now, honey guides are not even feeding on trees generally. So a lot of these features are not unique to the woodpecker, and our friend here in the video is depending on you not knowing that. So this is the problem of nested cladistics in suites of traits. We actually trace those traits down through lineages of different birds, so that we can classify them specifically. Heck, we get back far enough into this group, you're getting into toucans and things like that. With some of these same physiological features. It's wild that you're pointing this out as specific to woodpeckers.
A woodpecker's tongue goes as much as 10 inches out of his beak. Now, why? Well, because he's going to drill the hole, find the bug tunnel down in the tree, stick his tongue down in the tunnel, and drag the bug out. Now, you would have to say, could I stick my tongue down a hole in a tree and drag a bug out? Of course not. Well, how does the woodpecker do that? Well, God made the woodpecker with little barbs on the tip of his tongue, and he will literally stab that bug larva down in there because it doesn't want to come out. But in case that's not enough, he has a little glue factory in his tongue that manufactures exactly, precisely the right glue to stick to the bug, but it doesn't stick to his beak. And so
a factory. Where's Otangelo at when you hear that? Sorry, cough again. Just a second. This cough is going to be the death of me. A glue factory in his tongue.
So he pulls that bug into his mouth. Now we have a problem. If evolution is true, let's say over hundreds of thousands of years, this woodpecker got all this equipment, and then he glues his tongue to a bug and he swallows the bug. What just happened to his tongue? He just swallowed his tongue. He dies. He just strangled himself. Okay, but he doesn't. Why? Well, because as he brings the bug into his mouth, he has another little factory that manufactures the solvent to dissolve the glue.
Hey, fun fact about solvents. Water is a solvent. Water is one of the most common solvent, and in fact, any solvent you use likely is mostly water. So having like this is like sap off of a tree because it's water soluble, and it can disintegrate when exposed to water. So essentially, the salivatory glands of the woodpecker dissolve the stickiness of that's on the tongue. It's not as magical as he's making it sound.
So he dissolves the glue, loosens up the bug, swallows the bug. God made him that way. Woodpeckers, when they peck, they open their eyes between each peck, and they aim their beak, they focus, they aim their beak, they close their eyes, and then they hit the tree. So you hear a woodpecker out there, he's going, drr, drr. Every time you hear that, drr, in between each peck, he opens it.
Oh, honey, you missed the bombardier beetle. It was the very first one that they covered in this video. This is from 2000, but Hovind released it last night, like it's up to date in a coherent 2022 argument. This was released in 2000. No, so this is a 22-year-old video with a lot of debunked stuff. I did suggest Tony Reed's bombardier beetle video. If you haven't watched that, Logan Fisher, I strongly recommend that. Tony Reed did a great video on it. He's the reason I haven't done a video on the bombardier beetle. Why waste my time when his is freaking amazing? Yeah. And even the megalodon ate seaweed. Yeah, but that's what its sharp teeth was for, is for cutting the seaweed. But the seaweed was like, yes, cut me. It wasn't like, you're hurting me.
His eyes, focuses, aims his beak, hits the tree. Why? Well, they used to think it was just to keep the wood chips out. But now the scientists have measured the force of the impact of the woodpecker's head against the tree.
This part's true, and I like this part.
And the force is so great that if he did not close his eyes, he would pop his eyeballs out. So I would say, have you ever seen a blind woodpecker? No, they never miss. They never miss. Okay? Now, one special woodpecker, the European green woodpecker. I think he's unique in all the animal kingdom. I don't know for sure, but I think he might be. His tongue is different than any other tongue.
Yeah, the part about the eyes, though, that's true. If a woodpecker kept its eyes open while it was doing its thing, its eyes would pop out. Fun stuff.
Tongue, as far as I know. Our tongue starts in the back of our throat, comes up and out the front. His tongue starts in the back of his throat, goes down the throat, comes out the back of his neck, up over the top of his head. It's under the skin, comes out a little hole between his eyes, goes in one of his nostrils, and then comes out of his beak. And you would have to say, now, how does that evolve? I've asked evolutionists that question. I've said, now you tell me, how and where did that tongue come from? They don't have a clue.
What do you mean they don't have a clue? Natural selection. It needed a longer tongue because it was apparently it was in a ecological environment that required it to reach deep down into the trees to get the bugs. I don't know if it was specific species of ash borer grub that it was after that dived deep into the heartwood. Something like that it was after. Was it after some insect that went to the heartwood that it needs to go deep into the tree to retrieve it? But yeah, as the natural forces of the environment acted upon the organism, the ones that were able to achieve the goal of getting the grubs inside of the tree were the ones that passed on their genes. This is just evolution and how natural selection works, my friend.
They can't tell me. I'm saying, well, you're telling me that this bird evolved from some other creature, but there's no other creature that we know of with a
From another bird with a slightly shorter tongue.
tongue like that. How did that happen? They don't have any idea. So what could I say as a creationist? I would say God made that little woodpecker, and I think he made that woodpecker to challenge the evolutionary community, because as they study that little bird, they know there is no way this little thing could evolve. But it goes right back.
Well, again, we have a lineage, though, and here's the thing: when you're denying evolution, so you're like, oh, so this emerald woodpecker is its own kind. Is that the claim here, or is it in the woodpecker kind with the other woodpeckers? If so, did God make the other woodpeckers and this woodpecker just like side by side, and are they related to each other? And if not, and some of these woodpecker species, and even species beyond woodpeckers that are just in the same family, may be able to reproduce interspecifically. So we'd have some hybrids with between two different kinds. Is that the claim that you're making here? Where is the line with birds? Because you say birds as if it's something we should all know what it is. So, but birds are not a kind. There are different kinds of birds. So what is birds? Is that some kind of classification? Are none of the birds related to each other? And which birds, like we're talking about woodpeckers, for instance, are all woodpeckers one kind, or are there different kinds of woodpeckers? What about the honey guide? Because they're related to them. And some of the honey guides have features that are indistinguishable from woodpeckers. Some birds that are called flickers are actually woodpeckers, and some woodpeckers are actually flickers. And they just the common names interchange, but genetically speaking, they're closer related to other the one flicker is closely related to woodpeckers than it is to other flickers, for instance, because that's a common name, but genetically speaking, they're the same clades. So how does the creationist model divide these organisms up? Which ones are kinds, and how many, if we're talking about saying this individual species of woodpecker was its own kind, I can find features among countless other clades of organisms that you would say are all the same kind, that then we delve into those physiological features. You're saying those are going to have to be designed because they couldn't evolve independently, but they are not present in other groups that you would consider within the same kind. And that doesn't make any sense to me. So I would love to get some clarification on this model and how it divides things up.
Back to that Romans 1 passage, that as men study the creation, it says they study what God has made. Because they are unrighteous, they will suppress evidence. They will hold back evidence. And I think that's exactly what happened. I
don't feel like the evidence is being held back. I think you're misinterpreting the evidence or any kind of gaps in our knowledge about the way things have happened, or anything where we have to say for instance, the ancestor between this group and this group looked like this. We don't have any fossils of it, or probably looked like this. That is inference that is made just in phylogenetic classification, even in real time.
There are very bright people who study science and do a good job of it. But all of a sudden, they get to a point where they have to decide, did this thing happen over long periods of time somehow? Or, boy, it sure looks like it could have happened just bang, just like it is. And then if they discover, hey, I have no way of describing this thing in terms of evolutionary science, they're faced with the other option, which is maybe a designer and a creator, and they say, I don't want to go that way. Okay. So they suppress that.
So, like, you give a dichotomy like that, like either it was designed, or life on Earth was designed, or it wasn't. It was either designed by God or it wasn't. And this is where that often misquoted or cherry picked presentation by Dawkins when he was on that Ben Stein interview where he talked about panspermia. So yeah, there are a few different places in between that we can visit before we between abiogenesis on Earth and God. There's a lot of options in between. It's not a dichotomy.
That evidence. And so many of the things that I studied, we had to search just to find information on them because they are not in the textbooks. They just don't put them in because they have no way to explain it. And so they just ignore it.
Another bird that got Dr. Martin's attention lives down under, mate, in Australia.
There's a little bird in Australia. It's called the Australian incubator bird. Some people call it the mound builder. Sometimes it's called the brush turkey. And there's different species. We'll talk about one in particular. But
I wouldn't say they're a little bird. They're pretty big.
this little bird, about 3.5 to 4 pounds, the female has 2 jobs. Her first job is to check out the nest and see if it's going to be okay. The male builds the nest, and then the female checks it out. Now you would say, well, big deal. She's going to check out the nest. Well, this nest is not like any other nest. Some of these nests have been measured at 20 feet across and as much as 50 feet high. And some of them dig down into the dirt 3 to 6 feet. So it's like a huge, that's why they're called the mound builders. It's like a huge mulch pile.
This is sexual selection. Like how, just for instance, like we as women wear makeup to look attractive for our potential sexual partners or whatever. It's the same difference. And I know men can wear makeup too. I'm just making a rough analogy here, but organisms do the same. It's not always a physical characteristic of an animal's body that it uses to try to convince a mate that it's a viable partner. In the case of the megapode, which is what we're looking at here, called an Australian brush turkey. Yeah, but it's a megapode. It is building these amazing nests. It's like I am able to provide for you. Look at this fantastic nest, and it gets to the extreme where they're doing these extreme actions to impress these females. It just escalates so that now they're building these huge structures to impress their mates. It's kind of funny, and she's very picky about what she likes in the nest. But you'll see you'll see characteristics like that in other birds as well. There's some elaborate dancing that some birds have to do. Some, of course, building fantastic nests is always a quality that a female bird will look for in a viable mating partner.
So she comes and she digs down in there, and she comes out and says to Mr. Bird, I don't like this one. And so he says, okay, hang on for a couple months. I'll build you another one. Okay, so he builds her another one. Let's say she likes this one. Now she goes to job number 2, and that is she lays eggs. Now she lays 1 egg every 3 days for 7 months. And it's a little 3.5 to 4 pound bird, and the eggs are almost a ½ pound each. They're almost as big as an ostrich egg. Impossible. She's dead. I mean, you can't do that, okay? But she does now. This one species.
Why can't you do that? Do you know about how big a kiwi's egg is? Kiwis have such massive eggs that they take up the majority of their torso cavity when they're developed.
The female makes a very thick shell on the eggs. And it has pores. All birds' eggs have pores. That's how they breathe. But this one, the pores are shaped like little ice cream cones. And the tip of the ice cream cone is in toward the inside of the shell. So as the chick begins to develop inside the shell, he gets to a certain day and he can't get enough air. He's going, I can't get enough air. And so he begins to scrape off the inside layer of the shell. And that makes the holes bigger. He's going up the ice cream cone. So now he can breathe. And so he does that all the way along until he finally breaks out of the shell. Now, the male bird takes care of the nest. The female.
I don't understand why this is not something that can happen naturally. A lot of animals have very specific reproductive behaviors.
Once she lays the eggs, she just goes off, and now he takes care of the nest. Now, you would say, well, is that a big problem? Well, yes, because each species has some different qualifications for the nest. And this one I'm going to talk about, the male keeps the nest at 91 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 months. And if it varies by much more than a degree on either side of 91 degrees Fahrenheit, the chicks die. So daddy bird is out there every day. He digs down into the nest and he checks the temperature, and down into the nest and he checks the temperature. And the scientists aren't even exactly sure how he does the temperature, but he checks the temperature. Oh, it's 92 degrees. It's too hot. I got to do something. So he runs back up, and sometimes he'll throw sand.
I would say he would check the temperature the same way that any organism that has tactile temperature gauging would check the temperature. That's
And on top to try and reflect more sunlight, or he has various things he'll do. He also keeps that nest at about 99.5% humidity. If it gets down to about 80%, the chicks dry out, the eggs dry out. He has to keep it at roughly 99% humidity. So 91 degrees Fahrenheit, 99% humidity. That's impossible for a little 3.5 pound.
It is not impossible, because the ones that couldn't do it didn't survive. Only the ones that can do it survived. You're begging the question. Why are these this? Why is this possible? Because the ones that couldn't do it didn't survive. Stop begging the question.
4-pound bird.
Mr. Lizard, you missed Bombardier beetle too. This is from 2000, so this is before Bombardier beetle had been thoroughly debunked. So yes, at the very beginning of this video, the very first animal that we went over, the incredible creatures that defy evolution here, was the Bombardier beetle. So if you missed it, you can go back and check that out. You can go back and check that out. We went through quite a few so far. What we talk about? We talked about bombardier beetles, giraffes, woodpeckers. There was something else, but yeah. Anyway, we're going to keep moving.
Hatches out of its egg. It has all of its feathers. As far as I know, it's the only bird that it's ready to fly, but it can't fly because it's down deep in a big mulch pile. Now, nobody feeds this little bird. Dad doesn't feed the bird. Mommy bird doesn't feed the little baby. They come out of the egg, and then they somehow know, I got to get out of here. So they turn over on their back.
Yeah, that's the standard rule for organisms. We don't. We are more of an exception that we need parental care. Most animals do not need parental care when they're born. The majority of life on this planet requires no parental care to teach it how to feed itself or to be successful in the environment. Among vertebrates, it is more common to offer parental care. Among mammals, it's even more common. In birds, is usually it's birds. It's pretty standard to take care of your young. But let's hear what he has to say.
And they begin to scrape the sticks and leaves on top of them, and it'll drop down on their chest, and they shake it off their chest, pack it down with their little wings, dig some more, falls down, shake it off, pack it down. It takes up to 3 days for them to dig out of the nest. And nobody told them to do that. Nobody told them to go. Which way? Which way do I go? But how do they know that? You see, well, evolution can't explain those kinds of things.
Because the ones who don't dig out of the nest don't survive. So only the genetics of the ones who know to dig out of the nest are passed on. It's epigenetic. I don't know. I don't understand why this is so confusing for you. And again, you're begging the question by saying, how can they do this? Because the ones who couldn't do it didn't survive.
All right, so here it comes. He's out of the nest. Nobody shows it what to eat. He goes off. He knows what to eat. He knows how to catch it and find it. And then the next year, the male bird is going to build a nest. But daddy bird didn't show him how. He starts building a mound all by himself. Nobody showed him.
Because you don't just pass on physiological characteristics to your offspring. You also pass on behavioral characteristics to your offspring.
How to do it. It's a miracle. It's just a miracle.
No, it's evolution. Again, you think that that only physical features get passed on. Everything else has to be taught, but that's just not the case. It's not a miracle that the spider knows how to build a web without its mom ever teaching it how.
And so you look at even something like a little Australian incubator bird, and you say, how could that evolve? If
it's so funny because you went all the way to Australia and picked this select group of megapods to focus on, but yeah, spiders are more of definitely represent this behavior. And there are clades of spiders that even have their babies underground that dig their way out when they're born. So, or when they're hatched. So there's other ways to look at it. I think because spiders are a little too alien, and you're like, oh, but they have these behavioral drivers as well to know how to build a nest and get food without anybody ever teaching them.
If this story of evolution is true, how could that happen? I say only God can do that.
Here's something most of us pull out of the icebox every morning.
If you take an egg and you put it in warm water, you will see bubbles coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do you see those bubbles? Well, because there's little holes all through the egg shell.
Right.
About 10,000 actually in a chicken shell. Those holes are there so that the chick can breathe, because that's where he gets his air, through those holes, so they can get the waste out of the shell, because the chick, as he develops, is going to eat the yolk, and the yolk, as he burns it up, there's waste products, there's water and different things given off, and he has to be able to get the waste out of the shell, or for instance, just the amount of water that's given off, he would drown right there in the shell. How do you explain all the intricate mechanisms and the perfect timing that it takes for an egg to develop, making this whole thing happen? Because every step of the way, the chick would be dead. Everything has to be done on a particular day.
All of those steps are as we go back through the development of eggs, especially hard-shelled eggs, we can step by step go back through and see how these features developed.
And in a particular order, and the timing has to be exactly right, or you have a dead chick. If you have ever boiled an egg or eaten a hard-boiled egg, you'll notice when you peel the egg, there's like that little membrane in there. And that membrane has to be there. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But on one end of the egg, it's flat. And it looks like the chicken didn't quite fill the egg. Well, that's a special place. That's called the air sac. And so now we take all these parts and we put them together, and we have this little fertilized egg. And now this little chick is developing. By the 5th day,
chickens didn't evolve egg production de novo. It's not a new characteristic that they've evolved independently. This is the egg laying goes all the way back to when animals first really the egg laying is kind of the standard. I know that reproduction has a lot of variety, but at least among tetrapods specifically, egg laying is the basic. So before we even came onto land, before birds' ancestors even came onto land, they were producing eggs already.
Its little heart is pumping. Blood vessels have.
He's a dentist, Geosam. Most of these guys that they cite are have some kind of credentials similar to that, like a dentist or what have you. Don't tell him that hard-shelled eggs came from members of Dinosauria. Well, then they're still members of Dinosauria. Chickens are members of Dinosauria.
Grown out of the chick. 2 of them go up, hook into the membrane. And those are the ones that it's going to breathe through. It'll get its air through that. The air comes through the pores or the holes in the shell up to the membrane. And then.
Yeah, it would have been a fish. Fish is a funny term. It's like monkey or ape. It's polyphyletic. It means members of this group to the exclusion of that. So it's a layman's term. It doesn't actually work well in science to say fish. But yeah, hold on. You said invertebrate fish. So fish are vertebrates. There are no invertebrate fish. There are ancestors with what they call a notochord. It's like the you're fine. The notochord is like the prerequisite to developing a vertebrate, which is just essentially a calcified notochord of nerves, just with a calcified structure around it. So there are ancestral organisms that have notochords that maybe during the even during, I think it was during the Cambrian, Maison Creek. I can't believe I can't remember what the time period of that is, but yeah, those organisms with notochords that may have been early vertebrates, or yeah, there you go. We are all jawed fish. Yeah. So if you use the word fish to be synonymous with sarcopterian fish, let me try that again. Sarcopterygian, sarcopterygian. That having the wing word in there. See the PTER. That means wing. It's about the way that our lobe-finned fish, where we don't have rays. So that having that in there, you don't always pronounce the P. I kept trying to pronounce that. Lungfish are an exception, I think. Yeah, but that's a secondary loss of characteristics, isn't it? Yeah, if you want fish to be a monophyletic, it contains everything commonly considered a fish. It would also include every vertebrate, absolutely. Isn't his expertise in teeth and not evolutionary science? Yeah, but he was talking earlier about, here we go, sarcopterygian. Yeah, sarcopterygian. Thank you, Monkey for Banana. I was stumbling all over the place with that word. But yeah, the tear part, you do say the P in that. I would say the P sound in that there. Is it not sarcopta? Because generally with PTERI, it's Terry. Or PTER, not the I, sorry. It's tear, like pterodon or pterodactyl. Or, yeah, which means wings. Anyway, yeah, so regardless, let's move on. Thank you guys for popping in. Appreciate the clarification on that.
The membrane transfers the oxygen to the artery, the vein that goes into the chick, and then the other vessel that hooks into that gets rid of the waste. And so there's a process there.
I've just noticed the background music sounds really like a like softcore porn music.
Things coming in and things going out of the shell. Two more blood vessels hook into the yolk, and that's the way the chick eats. And as he lives in this shell, he begins to get to where he's too big and he can't get enough air. And it's now the 19th day. Now, during this time, he has grown a little tooth on top of his beak. It's called the egg tooth. Now, most of us grow our teeth inside our mouth, not on our...
See, Geo Salmon, you were worried he wasn't going to talk about teeth. He's talking about the egg tooth right now. What dentist does not spend hours of their doctoral study examining egg tooth?
But the little chick has this little egg tooth. And on the 19th day, he takes that and he pokes a little hole into that flat end of the egg where the air is. That's called the air sac. And now he has 6 hours to breathe. Now, if we're swimming and we're on the bottom of the swimming pool and we've run out of air and we get up to the top and I just made it. We usually just sit there and lean there and get some good air and breathe a while. Well, not the chick, because if he got into that air sac, I mean, he's going, I can't get enough air. And he pecks into that on the 19th day, not one day sooner or one day later, or it's dead. It's the 19th day, goes into that sac. Now he's got 6 hours. Now, is he going to just sit there and breathe that air? Or is he going to say, I need to do something else with this air, which is what he says. I've got to get a little hole.
He doesn't say anything because he's a chicken, but he is going to... These are things that evolved. Again, the ones that couldn't do this didn't pass on their genes. So only the ones that can. This whole video has been begging the question about the complexity of life. Of course, then we got the Behe argument of irreducible complexity, which obviously you saw with the bombardier beetle towards the beginning there. But
and use this 6 hours of air. I got 6 hours to peck a little hole through the shell. And now he breathes from the 19th to the 21st day through this little hole in the shell. On the 21st day, that's the day he breaks out of the shell. Now, in the meantime, the systems that hook into the membrane and the systems that hook into the yolk, all of those little vessels, they begin to disattach or detach themselves. And when he comes out of the shell, sometimes he might have a blood vessel hanging on him somewhere or something like that. But the fact is, these things, it's like he's dropped his spacesuit off and he is ready to go. And so he comes out of that shell on the 21st day. But every single step along the way had to have perfect timing. It had to be done exactly right. And when he comes out,
it's almost as if theropods have spent hundreds of millions of years perfecting this process, and the ones that could do this passing on their genes and the ones that could not dying off. It's almost like that happened.
he's a discrete entity. There's no mistake. This is a chick. All we see in all of nature, in the fossil record and in living creatures, is just discrete, identifiable. We can label them. That's a cow. That's a chicken. And so I think that's more evidence that God made everything, including little chicks, just exactly like they are.
All right, we're gonna stop right there for this video. Just because we're past the 2 hour mark now. I generally like to keep the show under 2 hours. It makes it so that everything's kind of uniformed on the production end of things. So in editing into things. So we're gonna end that right now. Now, since our housekeeping did take quite a bit of time, I am not going to be doing a HiveScience video for this stream. I may double up next week just to supplement that, or I may not, or I may triple up. Who knows? Depends on what I find that I want to talk about. But I may revisit the other half of this video. There's a part 2 to this too that Hovind didn't release yet, but I'm sure we could find a copy of it if you guys wanted to dive into it. However, yeah, I'm going to call this a live from the Hive ending here. So this was our Creation Watch as released by Kent Hovind Official. Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution. Amazing movie. Oh yeah, I'm still ratioing you, Hovind. I don't know if y'all saw that or not, but it has 2,962 views. Mine is where is it? Where is it? How am I doing? I'm just checking on that because my little clip video went viral. Kind of. Oh, did it go viral? I don't know if for a short, if 9,000 views is viral or not. I'm not going to complain about it. Yeah, it's still at 9K. It looks like. But it was a 7-second video, just silly 7-second silly video. I'm not saying have the same audience or anything. I'm just joking about it, ratioing him. But I, with my little less than 800 subscriber channel, I am pulling 9K on a video of a spider between my boobs. It's pretty funny. Anyway, please remember to be kind, take care, and we will see you next time.